Episode 6 Support Local Farmers. Hello and welcome, new listeners and old. You've spawned yourselves into my dark and little sordid corner of the world. You may call me Jessi, and I'm here to share with you the twisted and the strange, the eldritch encounters hidden from sight. So sit back, put your feet up, and listen as we dive into a new tale. This one from a personal DM, one who requested I keep their username out of it. Hey Jessi, I won't be telling you my name or the names of anyone involved. Mostly because we've all been harassed one way or another, and none of us really need that anymore. We all took a vote the other day because we stumbled on your show a couple of weeks ago now. We don't know if you'll really believe us, but no one else has, so we figured what the hell, already lived through the worst. See, we were part of the Farmers' Dominion. If you don't know what that was, the basic essence is in the late 90s and early 2000s, a group of Ontario farmers got together and decided to make their own little farmers-only city. The idea was that they'd purchase a large amount of farmland and build their own little village on it, their own little compound where only farmers lived and worked. They'd be a sort of self-sufficient community, occasionally selling harvests to the outside world. That was the idea. So they sold all their farms and used the money to purchase a rather large section of land out near Barrie. They had negotiations to purchase more after they made some profit, and the landowners, the city I think, agreed to hold off on selling to anyone else until they were ready. After 5 or so years, they expanded, almost triple their original size, and invited many a local farmer to join. That's when we jumped in. See, for independent farmers, ones like us who didn't have any government contracts or companies to bail us out, farming is a tough market to navigate. Most of the bigger names you see, things like McDonald's and Zayres and others, they all use large company-owned farms. Not necessarily owned by them, a lot of farms are owned by other conglomerates that then contract out to governments and companies. The advantages are numerous, though a lot of us feel like they're just selling out. I mean, it's a bit more complicated than that, and I don't really understand all the logistics, but a lot of people end up taking a company's offer due to need rather than want. So that's where those of us who are writing to you found ourselves when the Farmers' Dominion reached out to us. Torn between working the same land as our parents and their parents and their parents and so on, or selling and moving on to a more assured place. Now, they made us an offer that actually sounded pretty great. They would buy our land at fair market value, and then if we ever wanted to leave, they'd sell it back to us for the same price. Their idea was that their community could always use extra land as smaller sub-communities, satellite communes, they called them. And as part of the offer, there was a clause that stated if we wanted to go back to our lands after a mandatory period of a year on the main farm, but wanted to stay as part of the Dominion, we could become the leaders of the satellite communes. The Dominion would still technically own the commune, but we would be in charge of it, and still have the buyback as a safety net of sorts. To be honest, it sounded like the best deal most of us were going to get. Many of us were too small and too far spaced out to entice major companies or the government, and we were struggling on our own. Farmers markets were rapidly becoming our only source of income, and even that was starting to dwindle. We needed that deal, and I think Amanda knew that. Amanda Deleuze, the leader of the Dominion. Officially, she had no such title, as there was a small council that decided rules and regulations, but everyone knew that Amanda was really the one in charge. When the police finally came and arrested everyone, she put up no fight, just laughed and laughed and laughed. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We all agreed to join, of course we did. The process wasn't instantaneous. Selling land often involves lots of negotiating and lawyers and appraisers, and it can take months. Luckily for most of us, it was only a few weeks, and most of us jumped at the first offer. It was indeed market value, and we knew we weren't going to get a better deal. So we packed up and moved, went to the community, pledged ourselves to it, and that was that. There was no cost, not really. We had to buy our own equipment, but we could bring our old stuff too, so we weren't really hard up or anything. Everyone got their own little plot, close to the size of my own old farm, and about 30 or so acres. Not huge by any measure, but not tiny either. So we worked. It was pretty normal, actually. The council divvied up who grew what, and I ended up with wheat, which is what I'd primarily had on my own farm anyways. The Dominion would buy our harvests and sell them to whatever company wanted them. We could use our earnings to buy more land if we wanted, and many of us did that. We even had a Farmers' Dominion market in a couple of towns that we could go and rent a stall at. None of us were getting rich from this, you understand, but it was more steady income than we'd seen in ages. And, if I'm being honest, it was great. Some of the rules were a little weird, like there was a curfew that they enforced, but there was nothing that really bothered me. At least, not at first. It wasn't until I'd been there for just under a year that the infractions started. Things that hadn't been issues before were suddenly write-up strikes. Get too many strikes, 3, go figure, and you'd lose your eligibility to be a satellite leader, which is what many of us had been aiming for. Like myself, I got a write-up for my barn not being the same color as the main farm barn. Then my neighbor got one for having his dead wheat, ones that just couldn't be sold or used really, too close to his farm, in the compost building that they had provided. We all checked the rules that we had signed, and sure enough these were listed, but none of us remembered seeing them, nor had we ever been written up for them before. That put us in a bit of a bind, as the only way out from this was to rebuy our farms back, but that would have put us in the exact same point as before. After only an almost year, none of us had enough of a profit to buy back and properly staff and rework our farms. So we resolved to study the rules and prevent more write-ups, at least until we had enough money to buy them back and properly rebuild our own homesteads. And so we did. A small collection of us, largely the ones who survived, got together one evening and went over each and every rule. Some made sense. There had to be a certain minimum distance between expanded plots, which made sense since we didn't want root systems interlocking. Then there were the ones that made no sense, like having to measure a product by number in the yield, but sell it by weight, or the fence having to match the barn in color. We weren't particularly thrilled about it, but we all went and helped each other straighten up and fix up according to these rules. Now, the strikes only stay on file for a year, so even if we got 3 strikes, we could still be satellite leaders just later on. We all resolved that when we became these leaders, we would not be enforcing this stupidity on our communes. But that goal was a ways off for some of us, so we are still stuck in this purgatory. Then one of us got a 3rd strike. I won't say who, but we'd known it was coming. They hadn't come to the meeting even though they were invited, and they hadn't bothered trying to fix up their plot. The inspector came and issued him his 3rd strike. He was gone the next day, just gone. His stuff was still there, equipment, food, even his shoes, but he was nowhere to be seen. Now we all got a little worried at that. None of us ever connected it to the Dominion, not in a provable way, but we knew. Somehow we knew that they had taken him. Some ran, they packed their stuff and left. We don't know if they made it, but we suspect not. Some negotiated to get their farms back and came back smiling, packing their stuff up to go back home. We know they didn't make it. Some of us thought to put our heads down and try to avoid the strikes. Harvest came and went, and it was bountiful. More so than the last one, almost double. And the Dominion paid top dollar for their harvests. Like they had to have spent more than they were making, because they paid me almost double the previous season. It was almost enough to make me want to stay. Almost. The entire time, they still issued their strikes. My neighbor was 2 in, and I still just had 1, but I was paranoid at that point, so I taped the rules to all of my equipment, the doors, even my table. I had to ensure I didn't get those strikes. If I could make it to leader, I could be free and paid to be free. It was so close at this point I could taste it. And then I got my 2nd strike. I'd forgotten to put an additional post in my fence. A minimum number was required, and I was 1 short. 1. I had all the materials and tools, and I'd even tried to tell them so. Tell them I'd put it up the next morning. I just hadn't had time yet. They just marked down a strike on their stupid clipboard and left. Then my neighbor got his 3rd. I don't know what it was for, but he ran to me, being his closest neighbor, and begged me to hide him. He didn't want to end up like the others. See, this whole time, others had been joining and been given 3 strikes for one thing or another. They all vanished, like the first. We were all petrified, too scared to try to run, too scared to fight. We didn't even know what we were supposed to fight. No one ever saw them come, no one ever saw them go. They just disappeared. I agreed and ushered him in, brought him to the basement where we both sat, waiting out the night. We figured once the sun rose and he didn't disappear, he'd be good. How I wish that's what happened. I think about that sometimes. If I hadn't sheltered him, if we hadn't hid there, if, all of these what ifs, we all have them here. But we chose the basement. We still thought that humans were what was coming and kidnapping us. But as we sat there, silently watching the moon in that tiny basement window, I dozed off a bit. Couldn't have been more than a few minutes. I was exhausted and terrified. You have any idea what being terrified 24/7 does to you? Makes you unbearably tired, exhausted beyond belief. But when I came to, I saw it. What was taking us? The crops. Wheat, corn, barley, even potatoes. They all wrapped around him, holding him aloft before my eyes. His mouth was gagged on a potato, but his eyes told me just how scared he was. I stood there frozen. I was scared, confused, unsure of what to do, of even what was going on. They started to pull him into the ground through the hole they must have dug in to get in. It was much too small for the burly farmer, but they pulled and pulled and pulled, and after a moment I jumped in. I was trying to pull him back out. It didn't make a difference. It was like I wasn't even there. The pulling didn't slow at all. I watched him as he was pulled and constricted, contorted and broken to make him fit into the hole. I watched bones snap, skin stretch, his eyeballs popped. The entire time, the only sound I heard was the rustling of the plants themselves. He couldn't utter a noise. And then, when it was all done, the dirt and concrete and wood was placed back over the hole, and he was gone. I looked around, panicked, and that's when I saw her. Amanda Deleuze, standing outside the window, her head bent and looking in a sick, twisted grin on her face. She opened her mouth and said something to me. I couldn't hear, but I read her lips just fine. And honestly, I would have known what she said anyways. And it wouldn't have mattered. I was pretty much ready to piss myself after seeing that. That's strike 3. And then she was gone. I stood there unsure of what to do or say. I was next. The plants would come for me. Should I run? Should I call someone? There was no phones on the plot, so the only one being on the main farm, but some of the younger ones had smuggled in cell phones. Never thought I'd be thankful for their addiction to technology. I made up my mind and dashed out of the house. The closest one that I knew that had a phone was on the other side of the neighbor who'd just been plant napped. So I booked it through his field. I didn't care if I ruined his crop now. I didn't care if anyone saw me. All that mattered was that I get to the phone, I call the police. That's what was going through my mind. Get to the phone, call the police. Get to the phone, call the police. Get to the phone. I tripped and fell face first. I panicked, thinking it was the plants to come and get me for my third strike, but it was just uneven footing. I took a deep breath and stood, and that's when I heard it. That low groan. Now everyone knows what zombies sound like, and my mind immediately jumped to every zombie thing I'd ever seen or heard in my life, and I shakily looked behind me. It was my neighbor, but not. His bones were bent at odd angles, his head tilted to the point that his neck was clearly snapped and his eyes glowed lightly. I screamed at this point. I'd seen his eyes pop, and yet here they were, staring at me with a horrifying white glow. He shambled toward me and I ran. Not towards the phone, not towards my house, no particular direction, I just ran. I was panting and screaming, running and stumbling, unsure of just where I was, only that more groans were joining the first and getting closer and closer. And above it all, that chanting. A loud chanting in some language I could almost place, but not quite. It seemed louder and louder until it drowned out everything else, and it was all I could hear, even more than the groaning and the clawing figures behind me. How long had I been running? I couldn't breathe, the air pierced and sharp, and I was trying to take in more, and take in more, and take in more. My leg muscles screamed at me, my heart pounded faster than I thought the human body could handle. And then, as suddenly as it started, the chanting stopped, replaced by the sound of sirens. I stumbled and stopped, hoping beyond hope, and when I turned around, there they were. Bodies. Everyone that had tried to negotiate, everyone that got 3 strikes, my neighbor, people I didn't recognize, dozens of them all over the fields, all motionless. The red and blue lights flashing led me back to the police who were arresting Amanda. I don't know the official charges, but she just laughed. Over and over, loud and clear. She was eventually led away and some of the officers came to talk to us, with a contingent of ambulances behind them. And hearses. Eventually, I would learn that the police had sent in some undercover people who were there to investigate for tax fraud and other bureaucratic nonsense, but when I'd been seen screaming and running from what looked like people chasing me, they had called in their reinforcements. I don't know who it was, but they saved me. All of us. The investigation would have us unable to return home for months, but they put us up in some hotels and offered counseling, which many of us took. Not that we were believed, of course. The shrinks came up with every psychological BS nonsense words to explain it, but those of us who lived there, who saw, we know. Anyways, when we could finally return to society, society shunned us, hated us. How could we not know about the dozens and dozens of dead men and women? We all must have known, must have been complicit. We all moved as far away from there as possible, many of us now living in any city we can find, hiding from nature and farms. I myself only eat food bought from major companies now, and it's always highly processed. Can't even look at a farmer's market now, not without breaking into goosebumps. Doesn't help that Amanda escaped custody less than a year after her arrest, with the police unable to find any leads on her. Many of us live looking over our shoulders. I feel I owe the members of the Farmers' Dominion a bit of an apology. As kids, a bunch of us had heard of this, and even discounting when the teacher showed us the news. Of course, we assumed the survivors were guilty in some way. It was a farmer's murder cult and had magically struck a deal with lawyers or something. I was a kid, I had no real information on them, only what bits I saw and what rumors I heard, but I wholeheartedly thought that they were some crazy farmer murder cult, and for that, I am sorry. Living plants, well, more living than what we would normally consider. Somehow both a modern and ancient idea. I think farm crops turning people into zombies is a somewhat new thought, but the very idea of plants wreaking havoc or vengeance is something that I think only humans would ever fear. If somehow animals were to have sentience, I don't think they'd fear nature the same way we do. Of course, they haven't destroyed nature the same way we have. As always, thank you for listening, Dark Wanderers and not, and tell me, did this change your opinion on the murder farms? Are you a believer now, or are you as stubborn as ever? Until next time, let's cross that veil together.